St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church, so elegant in its cruciform simplicity and inspirational interior. Even the figure of St. Thomas in the stonework facade is inspiring. Placed between heavy wooden doors and an ethereal rose window, it directs the eye up to the finial cross and our hearts to Christ. Remember the first time you entered the church and peered through the leaded glass panes? You probably followed the long aisle to the altar rail and whispered a quiet prayer before the tabernacle. Maybe you lingered over the main altar's depiction of the Last Supper, then stood transfixed at the compelling rendition of the crucifixion. Did you notice the two peacocks adorning the underside of the canopy above it? They represent Christians drinking the waters of eternal life in the Blessed Sacrament. If you tried to cast a glance at the two side altars where Joseph holds baby Jesus and the Blessed Mother reveals her Immaculate Heart, you learned it's not easy to glance at anything in this church without wanting to see all of it. So, take a good look at the four sanctuary windows, portraying Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Turn toward the choir loft and see the rose window, cradled between two sets of organ pipes. Beautiful, aren't they? Look up in the nave, where 14 large, mainly blue windows are dedicated to the Mother of Jesus. You could hardly miss them, much less 27 smaller angel windows at eye level. Notice 3 shrines on each side of the church. On the west side, we celebrate the Infant of Prague, St. Anthony of Padua, and Our Lady of Fatima. On the east side, see the Sacred Heart of Jesus, St. Teresa, and a wood carving of the Pietà in color. That first time you were in the church, if you move slowly past all 14 wood-carved stations of the cross, you might have whispered, with a lump in your throat, "I feel like I belong here." And if the discovery was joyful, you do belong here. People are always important. Many people made this parish. You will hear about a few lives of the living stones in this architecture of grace. On your way out, pause in a narthex for a peek into the baptistry. You might get to see a tiny new Catholic come into the fold. St. Thomas Aquinas welcomed 292 babies and 20 adults into the Catholic Church in 2012. Besides being sacred and beautiful to see, St. Thomas has another special appeal. It's ours. Since its beginning in 1952, the parish has given spiritual nourishment to thousands. At this 60th anniversary, we can count over 4,000 households and 2 full-time priests, our pastor, Reverend John Labone, and Reverend James Yamuchi, 1 full-time deacon, Reverend Mr. Ken Reeser, and 2 other deacons, Reverend Mr. Rick Harrington and Reverend Mr. Edward Layden. Interesting ratio, 5 clergy, and let's say 10,000 parishioners. But it works. This overview of time and people may explain how the parish developed from a small offshoot schoolhouse into a huge, important parish with a beautiful church and a modern school with an enrollment of nearly 900 children. Cathedral School Number 2, officially named St. Thomas Aquinas, made a humble debut in 1947 when it opened with 4 classrooms and 209 children. But it served a real purpose, namely, an extension of the Sacred Heart Cathedral School. There was no way to fit the surge of World War II-era babies into the existing crowded school. The only solution was to build a small school on undeveloped diocesan property in Lakewood, not far from the area where new houses were beginning to appear. Surely, the near future would bring an influx of children. Within 2 years, the thriving school had its first upstairs addition. The Sisters of Divine Providence, who had commuted on the bus 5 times per week, moved into a newly built convent. For some time, a Sunday Mass had been offered in the auditorium for the Lakewood family's convenience. But a second Mass was added to accommodate the growing folding chair congregation. Monsignor John T. Golzinski, then Chancellor of the Diocese of Dallas, watched with interest as the elementary school gained importance. It became obvious to him that the fast-growing Lakewood area needed a parish with a real church and a resident priest. Already, the Lakewood parents had organized 2 important organizations, a Mothers Club and the Holy Name Society, with the Boy Scouts of America in tow. But unfortunately, nothing could be done at the time. The Monsignor's mentor, Bishop Joseph P. Lynch, who had ordained him in 1936, was terminally ill and could not rescind his strong stance against splitting the cathedral parish, and nobody else had the authority. The Monsignor's hopes soared in 1952 with the arrival of Bishop Thomas K. Gorman and the beginning of a new epoch in the diocese. 40 years later, as pastor emeritus, Monsignor John related with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, quote, "Every day I drove Bishop Gorman from his first Dallas home in Lakewood to the Chancery office, also in Lakewood, and each time I managed to go by way of the school on Abrams Road, so he could notice all the free acreage behind it." End of quote. When, finally, the bishop took the bait and asked why there was no parish there, his subtle driver said with a smile, "I don't know, but if it becomes one, I would be very happy to be assigned to it." The dynamic Bishop Gorman designated St. Thomas and several other sites for parish life, and also instigated the publication of the Texas Catholic newspaper to unify each parish as separate but all part of one diocese. Happily for Monsignor John T. Golzinski, he was assigned pastor of St. Thomas Aquinas, and he moved into a small house just across Kenwood Avenue from the school. The Mothers Club had become a strong, significant group of women, all of whom the Monsignor eyed as prospective core parishioners. When he called a meeting asking for their help to organize an altar society, he got the response he expected, a resounding yes. He was not surprised that the roster of the second organization was exactly like the first. Of course, Mothers Club business is about the school. The Altar Society's realm is the church. But at that time, all the same women did everything for both groups. Helen Eaton, one of the first active members of both organizations, recalls holding several offices in each. At first, being Mothers Club president automatically led to being president of Our Lady's Altar Society. At the end of the 2-year term, Helen recalled being president of each 3 times. Living across the street from the church and sending 5 children to the school, she developed an extraordinary love for and association with St. Thomas Aquinas Church and the school. Another special lady, the late Bertha Cagle, held office in the Altar Society as first vice president, sacristan, for 20 years. But titles never impressed her. She served her own ministry as housekeeper in the house of the Lord. She credited her assistants, Roberta Schnitzers, Gladys Scannell, Helen Schaefer, and many more with doing everything, and especially Rick MacDonald, whom she called her right-hand man. Since Bertha's death, Rick has followed the same path as first vice president, sacristan, for longer than a decade. Prior to that, he already had about 10 years of experience as a volunteer. Father Claude Smythe, a tall, dark-haired priest from Ireland, was the first of at least 40 priests who served in the capacity of parochial vicar. Many came directly from the seminary and spent at least 2 years of their early priesthood at the rectory, under the guidance of Monsignor John, 2 of whom eventually were elevated to bishop, namely Most Reverend David E. Fellhauer, and more recently, Auxiliary Bishop Most Reverend J. Douglas Deshotel. St. Thomas Aquinas Parish also produced several young priests from within the parish. Reverend Monsignor Robert Corver, Most Reverend Michael Duca, now Bishop of Shreveport, Louisiana, Reverend Monsignor Milam J. Joseph, Reverend Joseph Meehan, and Reverend Jerry Priest. Once again, in 1955, expansion became necessary to accommodate a larger parish, starting with an actual church. Bishop Gorman spoke to the Monsignor about organizing parishioners to help build one. It would be a major project and would require help on every level. But founding members were easy to find, and everyone was delighted to help. Monsignor John chose a committee of 7 for the fundraising. J. M. Hager, campaign chairman. J. W. Mangelsdorf, vice chairman. J. T. Hennessy, chairman, Advanced Memorial Gifts. William D. Conway, chairman, Special Gifts. J. P. Kinney, chairman, Parish Solicitation. Marvin Springer, chairman, Publicity, and Henry A. Fluchet, chairman, Finance. The initial thrust was to raise $350,000 of the $700,000 in order to start the building. Anyone who wanted to help could contribute in some way, such as raising funds for a shrine, buying or selling stained glass windows or pews, or by making a donation. Finishing the interior was going to be expensive for its time, and the cost of each item was listed for everyone to see. In 1956, when the church was under construction, a $50,000 main altar was deemed very expensive, and so was a $8,000 rose window. The large blue stained glass windows cost $1,850 apiece, and the angel windows $750. Certainly, the entire cost was formidable, but pledges and time helped produce a spectacular place of worship. It's no surprise that all the statues are similar in size, shape, and appearance, as if they had been commissioned at once and delivered together. And they were, along with a blue and gold mosaic backdrop for each shrine. All were commissioned in northern Italy in 1955, when Monsignor John went to Europe on vacation with another priest. It was not a shopping trip, he said, but I took the church plans and dimensions with me just in case. Certainly it was not. But nonetheless, some skeptics might question the sheer happenstance of his visit to the actual town, also in northern Italy, where Michelangelo chose marble for the Pietà, and probably for David. After seeing the cutters at work, the Monsignor selected marble for altars, shrines, pulpit, altar rail, and floors. He ordered all of it while he was there. Furthermore, despite the fact that it was no shopping trip, when the Monsignor left Italy, he doubled back to Dublin, Ireland, where previously he had run across the most elegant tabernacle he had seen, along with 6 floor candlesticks, 4 smaller candlesticks, and special one for the Easter candle, and 2 7-foot sanctuary lamps. Every piece was finished in the same burnished bronze and satin bronze, and all were still available. He had the set shipped to Dallas. It took 2 years to build our church, but its size and beauty were striking. It spread 175 by 92 feet and soared 71 feet to the top of the 7-foot finial cross. Monsignor John kept a close watch, according to his neighbor Helen Eaton, who actually saw our dignified and titled Prothonotary Apostolic Right Reverend Monsignor Papal Chamberlain, Doctor of Canon Law, and pastor, up on the church roof with the workmen, like a foreman inspecting the red tiles and the cross. But this title explains everything. Diocesan Building Commission member, chairman for sacred liturgy, music, and art. Finally, the church was dedicated on June the 9th, 1957. At the same time the church was dedicated, the 10-year agreement with the Sisters of Divine Providence expired. When school opened in September, the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth had settled into the convent. The school was overloaded, but there were no quick answers for making it less crowded. Just as the parish has expanded and grown over the last 10 years, the war babies and boomers had grown accordingly, both in size and number. Every classroom was way overextended. The enrollment roster for September 1957 named 54 eighth graders starting their final year at St. Thomas Aquinas, all in one classroom. Moreover, there were 60 names listed for the 7th grade, but having a real church made available some auditorium space, thus providing a very roomy classroom for half of the class. The following year, however, relief was in sight. At least to the teachers of St. Thomas Aquinas, the baby boom seemed to be waning, when the 5th grade roll call tallied only 45 in one room. The 60s and 70s introduced unexpected changes at St. Thomas, as it did within the entire Roman Catholic Church during the time of Pope John XXIII and Vatican II. Our main altar was moved forward, and the priests faced the congregation. The tabernacle remained beneath the crucifix, and in our church, the marble and brass altar rail remained in place. For the first time, we heard the Mass in English and had the option of receiving the Blessed Sacrament in our hands. We exchanged the sign of peace and all but stopped wearing hats and chapel veils. The Friday abstinence and the Lenten fast were eased with some exceptions. The pre-communion fast was simplified. The sacrament of penance was renamed reconciliation and offered the option of face-to-face conversation with the priest. And more lay persons, women as well as men, appeared in the sanctuary as lectors and Eucharistic ministers. Furthermore, young altar girls served at Mass as well as altar boys. As always, St. Thomas Aquinas Church and School provided a spiritual haven for prayer and meditation in frightening and worrisome times. The space race news brought triumph, interrupted by tragic explosions and deaths. Pre-existing racial issues continued to spread, most fearfully with the assassination of Martin Luther King. Unrest and tragedy accelerated in Vietnam, and the war seemed endless, and threats from Cuba continued. The very worst time of all for Dallas came with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And the Cold War with Russia went on and on. We were thankful for feeling safe and peaceful at St. Thomas. Classes started to swell again as Catholics and Protestants alike sought peace and security in a parochial school. Some good news. Finally, in 1966, a real rectory was built, literally connected to the church, and a larger convent was dedicated. Other good news. In 1971, the school was fully air-conditioned. During the 70s, the Monsignor had a really special idea for a springtime altar society benefit, an annual food festival, wherein people would make for sale dishes they knew from their heritage to be eaten at the event and/or for carry-out. The food wasn't all ethnic, though. The preschool mother's booth served desserts. According to Diane Dozer, who had already helped her mother, Sophie Flouchet, make a vat of German potato salad, serving in the dessert booth got pretty frantic, slicing pie, cutting cake, and juggling cookies like a movie played at the wrong speed. The festival was a terrific success because at that time, other than Chinese, Italian, and Tex-Mex, ethnic food was not generally available in Dallas. It was fun to find Belgian waffles, Czech kolaches, German potato salad, and Middle Eastern cuisine alongside the tacos and meatballs. Middle Eastern cuisine was especially in demand. Janie Ashmore's booth featured the style from the tiny nation of Lebanon, highlighting tabbouleh, baked kibbeh, and big, flat pita loaves. The big news of the 1970s came when the decade was drawing to a close. A spectacular gift from the parish, a $150,000 Schutte pipe organ was installed and dedicated on October the 2nd, 1978. By the beginning of the next decade, the spectacular Schutte organ and a musical genius named Paul Rideau would meet and make choir loft history together. St. Thomas Aquinas congregation never would be naive about church music again. Meanwhile, in the early 80s, another round of construction was initiated with the addition of a big music room, 6 more classrooms, and an enlarged library. A conference room and new offices replaced a well-known central feature known from the beginning as the Black Counter. By the end of the decade, we would have 2 major additions. The middle school science lab would be complete, and, secondly, a set of trumpets would be attached to the organ to commemorate Monsignor Golzinski's Jubilee. The organ had been in place almost a year before SMU's Dr. Robert Anderson sent a young graduate music student, Paul Rideau, to audition for the position of organist and music director. The Monsignor knew he had the right man when he heard Paul begin the opening bars of Silver Trumpets, the traditional papal march played at the Vatican when the Pope enters St. Peter's. Of course, the Monsignor recognized the music. It was his favorite. And for years, Paul played it whenever the Monsignor's procession departed after Mass. The music tradition has been upheld by our music directors since then. Paul died young, in the mid-90s, leaving big shoes to fill. But he had paved the way for 2 other very strong musicians. Michael Linder, who spent 15 years as organist music director, and our current organist music director, Michael Conradi, both very talented. At St. Thomas, we tend to take for granted the quality of our musicians who coax the softest whispers and loudest thunder from our seasoned grand old Schutte, and likewise can evoke the sweetest sounds from our cantors, choir members, and congregation. In a way, being taken for granted may be a sign of a healthy system. All the names listed on the front of our Sunday bulletin confirm that someone who cares is in charge of something important, on the parish organization side as well as the pastoral administration and school. For one example, consider the ushers, headed by the very fit David Dozer, a former basketball, soccer, and volleyball coach at the school. Keeping about 60 ushers on schedule is a challenge, even for a man who routinely runs around White Rock Lake. Our totally reliable ushers themselves are also taken for granted. Did you know we need 7 ushers for every weekend Mass? Not counting the ushers on call for funerals, headed by Jerry Lerner. Occasionally something sad happens that nobody can be prepared to accept. On June the 24th, 1989, while saying Mass, the beloved Monsignor John collapsed from a stroke. He recovered, but retired to the status of pastor emeritus and remained at the rectory 12 years. His life spanned just under 93 years, from August the 26th, 1911 to July the 1st, 2004. When Father Stephen Bierschenk was appointed pastor in 1989, the parish welcomed his return. He was well acquainted with the church, school, and congregation, having spent from 1979 to 1983 as parochial vicar. The second time around, he was the only fully active resident priest, although Monsignor John still offered some masses. Reverend Father James R. Sharp was assigned as parochial vicar. He was active and popular as well, but lived at home. He was among the first set of 5 Episcopal priests who moved to the Catholic Church. He made a remarkably smooth and successful changeover. Now retired from a pastorate at St. Michael the Archangel Church in Garland, Father Sharp faithfully comes to St. Thomas to celebrate Mass on Sundays. During the 90s, Father Bierschenk steered the parish through a period of extraordinary growth, an influx which included a large percentage of young families and a big increase in the number of school children. He stressed the importance of the school to our parish. By 1992, Spanish was part of the curriculum for 3rd through 8th grades. St. Thomas Aquinas School received its first blue ribbon for certifiable excellence. Under Father Bierschenk's leadership, the St. Thomas Aquinas Knights of Columbus Council, 11937, was established. Right away, the group grew to 100 members. In 1997, on the Friday preceding Good Friday, the Knights established the traditional Lenten fish fry as a gift to the parish. Now, in 2013, the council boasts more than 350 members. Father Bierschenk also encouraged the Christ Renews His Parish CHIRP program, which started in 2002. Deacon Ken Reeser guides the group retreat in an environment conducive to the quiet sharing of faith and discussion of personal life experience. The goal is a renewal of strength, broadened understanding, and peace. A major construction project was finished in 1998, with hallways and passageways to connect separate parts of the church around a courtyard. The system would connect the new bride's room, meeting rooms, offices, and also 2 large adjunct buildings, a spacious St. Anne's Hall, and a very large gym. Where the passageway starts at the narthex, a new gift shop was set up, with shelves, glass doors, and cabinets. For the first time, there was room to display small statues, rosary, and many other religious articles. Margaret Preston, the organizer and manager, remembers 1996, when the Altar Society's venture was in its infancy. It was no more than a rolling cabinet set up at the school entrance. Her goal was, and still is, to make sacramentals available and convenient through the Altar Society, with proceeds going back into the Altar Society's treasury. Volunteers keep the shop open on Sunday mornings until after the 12:45 Mass, September through May. The passageway, which connects the church with meeting rooms, rectory, and St. Anne Hall, encloses a peaceful courtyard. In quiet times, you can hear tranquil waters of the fountain as you enjoy looking at the trees, flowers, and statues of St. Francis and the Blessed Mother. An old meeting room, which lost access to the outside, was converted to the St. Jude Library, with access through St. Anne Hall. Separate from the school library, its initial purpose was to offer religious books, but now it has grown to include a wide selection of other subjects, as well as a collection of religious art and artifacts. The St. Jude Library is dedicated to the family of Monsignor Milam J. Joseph. 12 years later, as the parish celebrates its 60th anniversary, the library has much more to offer in the way of Catholic material on church teaching for adults and for children as well. If you ask Dennis Wallow about the growing art collection, he will be very happy to show you. To name only a few pieces, first and foremost, the painting of the library's patron, St. Jude Thaddeus, by Rex Kerr in 2003. The statue of Mary Magnificat with the dove of the Holy Spirit purchased by the Monsignor in Spain. Another piece, a favorite, is a small replica of the Vatican's Ark of Apostles, 5 inches high, from the Hamilton collection. The St. Jude Library is growing, with strong support from Don Kubala, Dave Noblet, donors John and Mary Gilhooly, Teresa Goldsmith, and the regulars, Dennis Wallow, Teddy Vale, and Alice Fernandez. When our pastor, Father John LeBone, came to St. Thomas in 2002, a fundraising campaign was in progress for enlarging the school again. Before construction could start, however, a timely opportunity arose to purchase a convenient city block on Mockingbird Lane, with a school and church intact, a parking lot, and another section currently leased to a commercial cafeteria. The campaign changed direction, bought the first community church property, and updated the buildings to suit children from pre-kindergarten through 2nd grade, 4 sections of each, and an existing chapel was renovated. According to Ann Gunst, first principal of the school, the original lower school proposal was to create a separate middle school for the older children. The new property turned out to be ideal for the youngest children to have their own classrooms, scaled to size, and a proper playground. The decor is cheerful and colorful, with brightly colored backpacks hanging on hooks to replace drab lockers. Gym classes geared for little tykes are especially fun. In this case, everything turned out for the best. Both schools are modern, cheerful, and filled with the happiest school children anyone can imagine. The schools are well staffed and in shipshape, with Patrick McGee at the helm and his dedicated team of administrators and teachers at both the upper school and at the lower school property, called the Monsignor John T. Golzinski Early Learning Center. Now, take a look at the property adjacent to St. Thomas Aquinas, which for many years Monsignor John tried to buy, but to no avail. Finally, also on Father John LeBone's watch, it came up for sale negotiation, which worked out well. With the classroom dilemma resolved, a new playing field is already planned to accommodate both a football field and a baseball diamond for all the young people of the parish. The church itself has spread to cover a much larger space than its original 1957 dimensions, and the 4-room Cathedral School No. 2, never called by any name besides St. Thomas Aquinas School, is now the largest Catholic grade school in Texas, with almost 900 school children, counting approximately 300 in the lower school. One of the most remarkable features of the St. Thomas Parish, Church, and School is the spirit of love and pride which prevails throughout. We see that spirit in 3rd and 4th generations of the founding families who stayed within the parochial bounds or came back, some to teach. Others, who more recently chose to live in the parish, feel a similar bond and catch the spirit of belonging. When St. Thomas Aquinas was only a small schoolhouse and every parent was a pioneer of sorts, each had an important role to play. When the parish was established, then the church, the surge of involvement was incredible. But now after 60 years, an incalculable growth factor has spurred a remarkable spirit belonging in each generation. Long-time and newer parishioners, old and young alike, connect, get involved, go further together. But we always did that. And now the St. Thomas Aquinas spirit is stronger than ever. So, our reminiscence of the first 60 years of St. Thomas Aquinas Parish ends the same way it started, more than a half-century ago. Each generation has shown a remarkable spirit of belonging, with both young and older families connecting, becoming involved, and moving forward together.